Well, I know, Congressman, there's been a lot of great things that have been happening for agriculture as of late. CFAP 2, we know that CCC is going to be able to have some funding, which is a big news for our producers. That budget comes out of the House. And unfortunately, that was a little bit of a sticking factor as you guys voted. Looking at that and the overall picture for agriculture, what's your takeaway from the work that you guys just did in Washington?
Well, it's interesting when agricultural funding becomes a sticking factor. Actually, it's a little bit of a blessing in disguise because it points to all of Congress being engaged around a critical point for America's well-being, support for farmers and ranchers and food security. So in the complexity of budget negotiations, the budget for the federal government ends in September. We have to do something or it will shut down. The House has just acted. And again, one of the key points of negotiation was around replenishing the Commodity Credit Corporation so that farm payments would continue uninterrupted this fall. I'm actually, again, pleased that this was a key point of negotiation because, again, it socializes for the entire Congress just how important the work of farmers are, not only for food security, but also economic well-being and vitality for our entire country. Sometimes that gets overlooked, just how important this sector is.
Well, we know that there's been already folks requesting funds from the CCC. One of them was for farm workers. Has that come up during your discussion on the floor?
Well, it was just the broad construct of how the funds would be replenished so that there would be no disruption this fall. Again, these things tend to quietly happen. This time it was pretty loud, and that's a good thing, because it just shows you how important agricultural public policy is to the well-being of America, and particularly members of the House, need to know that, particularly as America becomes more urbanized and there's less direct connectedness to the farm. Those of us in farm country are constantly working quietly as an undercurrent of public policy to ensure that stabilization is there and those with food insecurity are protected. Doesn't always get headlines. This time it did.
Well, and I know, Congressman, agriculture in general has been really in the headlines as of late. I mean, COVID-19 has been such the lead, but it's been the trickle-down effect that has maybe gotten attention of consumers and others in Washington who maybe don't have ties like you do to agriculture. So it's been nice to see the assistance that's been there. We know that you worked really hard when it came to the issues that have been happening with fairs all across the nation. That definitely got some national media attention.
Yeah, it's kind of a both and. An interesting statistic is the fact that about half of our food goes to institutions, restaurants, and schools. And so when COVID hit and you had basically a shutdown of restaurants and schools, there was a lot of logistical problems that had to be resolved very quickly to make sure that that food supply moved to grocery stores and food banks and other places where it could be used and not lost. So you remember there was about a week there where there was a lot of attention paid to this critical component of what we don't even think about, how our food actually is supplied and then moved. And so adjustments were made, and then that was a good thing. Regarding the agricultural fairs, again, a victim of the coronavirus that has caused so much suffering. These fairs are critical to America's well-being from my perspective. They obviously are a wholesome form of entertainment for communities, but way beyond that, showcase agricultural products and help train the next generation of young farmers and ranchers through the livestock shows and various exhibitions that take place. So I was a little bit disturbed with you, Susan, because you didn't make my visit to the Agricultural Secretary Forum because you were at the state fair, so you had a good excuse. But nonetheless, that's another reason you chose to be at the state fair, because, again, being with those young producers is the continuity of the great American farm tradition that runs through our state and county fair system. So we've stepped up to try to put some pressure there as well to create conditions in which they can remain viable. And I think that's important.
And I think sometimes bringing somebody out of Washington, D.C. and bringing them to the rural areas, the opportunity to sit down and talk to producers maybe gives them a better insight as to what's happening.
Well, if I could use that as a segue to the fact that we did have the agricultural secretary here a couple of weeks ago, we did three things. One, there was a forestry agreement signed with the governor, a forestry stewardship management agreement. Secondly, we were at the university showcasing what I call the farm of the future and how the University of Nebraska is positioning itself to use precision agriculture, the advancements of technology to increase yields, lower inputs for environmental sustainability. But also, as we're building out this system, the key is net revenue to the farmer and opening options for new forms of agriculture in many ways, or traditional forms in which smaller scale ag is moving products directly to consumers, because local agricultural economies and regional agricultural economies are the next wave of opportunity in agriculture. So those were great discussions. And then finally, we had a roundtable with Secretary Perdue and traditional livestock and row crop producers there, but also smaller scale farmers who are doing amazing things in niche markets, including one urban farmer who transformed a city block here in Lincoln, and they grow a lot of their own food. The secretary whispered to me, he said, this is the type of thing that my staff has a hard time pulling me away from. But it just showcased the broad spectrum of agricultural entrepreneurship in Nebraska, the excellence of the university system, and then took the ideas of what the 21st century architecture for agricultural policy is going to look like translated here in the ground so that we increase opportunity, advance environmental sustainability, and actually augment the agricultural family.
And finally, Congressman, I'm wondering if you guys have had a chance to look over the bill that was introduced the act on the Senate side from Senator Fisher on the Cattle Market Transparency Act, and what that's going to mean to Nebraska cattle producers and really producers across the nation.
Well, we've got a heavy concentration of slaughter capacity. This obviously has been an ongoing problem, and there's a government investigation going on into it. One of the alternatives as well is to begin to rethink how investments in smaller scale slaughter capacity that are more regional in nature take place. So my participation in this question has been around how do we actually increase competition, which would assure that we don't have the problems that we saw in the spring with the backup of capacity causing a disruption in the food supply. So that's it's an ongoing concern about price transparency, of course, but I would like to see more competition in this market.
All right. Anything else you'd like to add?
Other than we continue the hard work in Washington to bring about the stabilization policies for farmers and ranchers and protect those with food insecurity. This pandemic has been really tough and disruptive, but again, American agriculture, when you don't hear a lot about it, that means good things are happening because our food supply is safe and stable, and all that credit goes to the good stewardship of our farmers and ranchers who do keep that aspect of the American economy rolling. And then finally, we will continue the agricultural appropriations work this year. There's a lot of new innovative things that I've tried to move into this bill. I've served as the ranking member of the Agricultural Subcommittee of Appropriations, so we fund these policies. One of which is rural broadband. When a mother is writing me that she's sitting in the parking lot of her school in Columbus trying to get access to the internet so that her child can do homework, it just demonstrates that while we're all taking a digital leap that has huge implications for rural development, particularly telehealth and teleeducation and even telework, it has to be workable. About 30% of America is underserved in this regard. So providing the foundation for the digital road is really going to be key for this old idea of rural development, for which I've introduced a new concept called the ecosystem of livability. That's going to be huge for us in rural America.